President Trump is putting out on social media, as well as what he said from the Resolute. Well, I guess it's not the Resolute desk because he's got that one that one's been pushed out for a cleaning. He's using an older desk, I think used by George H. But we'll see what he said from the Oval Office desk. And then we're going to go to Dr. Andy Woods, Middle East Bible Prophecy Update. First, let's go to David Pine, the latest on Russia and Ukraine. Here is first the Truth Social put up by President Donald J. Trump, based on the fact that Russia is absolutely pounding, and he put that in quotes, Ukraine on the battlefield right now. I'm strongly considering large-scale banking sanctions. Sanctions. He said it twice. I'm not stuttering. Sanctions, and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire. So he's going to large-scale banking sanctions, and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire and final settlement agreement on peace is reached. Some of this is in all caps. To Russia and Ukraine, get to the table right now before it's too late. Thank you. Joining me now is David Pine of dpine.substack.com and emptaskforce.us. Hi, David. Thank you for joining us by phone today.
Hey, Brandon. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So what do you make of today's developments, David?
Well, I think that, President Trump is right to blame Ukrainian President Zelensky for, being an untrustworthy negotiating partner. Zelensky, of course, refused a ceasefire. It was reported that Russia had offered a ceasefire on February 18th in Riyadh to the U.S., providing that there was substantial progress on the agreement of a peace framework that would exclude any European peacekeepers in Ukraine. And most likely he conveyed that to Zelensky, and Zelensky said, no way, we're not agreeing to a ceasefire. And so obviously there's been a cutoff of all U.S. military and intelligence aid to Ukraine. That appears to be temporary. It's likely to be restored within the next probably a couple weeks or so. But President Trump, again, is absolutely right to blame Zelensky. As far as the tariff and sanctions threat against Russia, there's really not much more leverage we can have on the Russians. That's negative leverage because we pretty much maxed out the sanctions, and we have against Russia under Biden, and we have virtually no trade at all. The only trade we have with them currently is uranium purchases, which are vital to U.S. national security. So we'd be hurting ourselves, if we were to impose tariffs on that.
So you think that President Trump is now getting closer to likely pulling out all U.S. troops, intelligence officers, defense contractors, and a lot more, right?
I think he is, yeah. And it's all, if basically it's conditioned on the peace talks that we're having with Ukrainians in Riyadh next week. If we can't get them to agree on realistic peace terms, then that would be Trump's, most logical next option would just be to announce a full pullout. And his better option, I think, would be to simply cut off Starlink access and say, we'll turn it back on as soon as you guys agree to an immediate ceasefire. But I'm not sure that they're really considering that. There's been reports that was something that we threatened, including General Kellogg threatened against Zelensky. But Elon Musk said that was absolutely not true. I still think it's possible that we did threaten that. I'm not sure if we're willing to go through with that because that really would entail, a collapse of Ukrainian defenses that would enable the Russians to, seize territory at a much faster pace. So I think that's kind of the nuclear option that the Trump administration is saving in case Zelensky just continues to, be completely unreasonable.
Now, Russia, you're reporting on your X account today that Putin, he agreed to a ceasefire deal February 18th, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. We weren't aware of that, and so that's being reported by some as Putin caving to Trump's tariff and sanctions threat. However, that's incorrect because this offer was made 2.5 weeks ago, so it had nothing to do with the tariff and sanctions threat.
Okay, so where do you see things going, David, if you had to guess right now?
Well, I do think I'm a little concerned that the Trump administration is going out of sequence. It had a really good plan, get Ukraine to sign the minerals deal, and then we would meet with the Russians and proceed with a peace framework negotiation. Then we would share the results of our negotiations with Ukraine, and then decide if we wanted to support them on any of their proposed revisions to the peace agreement, and then take that back to Russia to see if we could incentivize them positively to accept any of those revisions. But I'm a little concerned that if Trump tries to negotiate a Ukrainian-supported peace framework and take that to Russia, then the Russians are just going to throw a fit and say, "This is we can't negotiate this with you because these terms are completely unacceptable." But I think it's more likely that the Trump administration is realistic enough to be basically telling the Ukrainians, this is what we think that Russia might be willing to accept, and we need you to accept it too. And maybe we can tinker around the edges with stuff that you want to do, but if you can't accept that, then U.S. support could be cut.
And you were saying on our broadcast earlier this week that this is, we're still in a very dangerous position here, because Ukraine and Macron, even yesterday, at least we played it yesterday, I'm not sure when it was, in local time for him, but he's basically saying we've got to weaken Russia. Putin is not going to sit by and let Macron and NATO weaken him.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, in the war, there's no danger of us weakening Russia, of course, because everything that the West has done has massively strengthened Russia. Granted, there have been 4,000 or so lost Russian armored vehicles. We've killed off about 100,000 Russian troops, 150,000 wounded on top of that. Ukrainian casualties have been 4 times higher, but in the last 3 years since the war began, Russia's economy has surged from the 6th largest in the world to the 4th largest, ahead of Germany and Japan. While their military is, their army alone has been expanded by 3 times. So, they have 3 or 4 times as many troops in Ukraine than they had when they invaded. They're spending on their military at Soviet-era levels, over twice what they were spending before the war started. And their military is 50% larger overall, and they're producing tanks at an astounding rate. Tanks, missiles, munitions. I wrote a post on X last week reporting that they were producing more nuclear-capable ballistic missiles a year than the U.S. has in its entire inventory. So, and it's also been reported that Russian spending in terms of purchase power parity on their military exceeds all of NATO's 30 member states. So, it's also been reported by the Russian press that they're producing missiles and ammunition at a rate essentially 4 times higher than all of NATO combined.
And we reported last night on Brighton House Live with you that China is not backing down from the idea of sending in troops to help Russia fight Ukraine, correct?
I think that report was it was nixed, but it was basically nixed for political reasons, because it was reported essentially by Ukrainian intelligence and leaked to the Ukrainian press that posted it. But then the Ukrainian government asked that story be essentially negated, but it still remains on a couple of Ukrainian media sites. And essentially, what I assess it is China is offering Russia, to send probably a division of PLA troops to help them fight in Ukraine if the peace talks break down. So just basically underscoring the level of their support for their Russian ally.
All right. So, David, if people want to follow your account on X, his handle, folks, is at America First Con, C-O-N, at America First Con. Again, he is now he's the president of the EMP Task Force. Again, his Substack is DPYNE, D Pine. His last name is PYNE, dpine.substack.com. emptaskforce.com. And also, you can find him at emptaskforce.us. Look forward to another update, as this is a fluid story tonight on Brandon House Live. Thank you, as always, David.
Thanks again, Brandon. Talk to you soon.
You bet. David Pine checking in, folks, president of the EMP Task Force, dpine, D-P-Y-N-E, dpine.substack.com. Joining me now is Dr. Andy Woods for our weekly Middle East and Bible prophecy update. Dr. Woods, welcome back to the broadcast. Thanks for being with us.
Brandon, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
You too, my friend. We had a very interesting show last night with Patrick Wood. People can go to Worldview. It's up there right now, right, Logan? WorldviewTube.com? WorldviewTube.com. We did a show last night. Elon Musk says we're going to have to go to universal basic income. That's what he said, and we have him on video saying it, recently. He was over at the World Government Summit in the United Arab Emirates. And he's talking about going to universal income. He says that we are going to see basically deflation, what he's predicting, once AI and robots roll out. He said that we're going to have a flood of services and products. The market will be flooded with cheap, very inexpensive products and services. And so now, of course, we know the definition of inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods, services. Too many dollars chasing too few goods and services. Whereas he's saying, hey, we're going to have a flooded market of services and goods now, very inexpensive to be available. So he basically sounds like he's talking about a deflationary cycle there. I don't know if that's true or not. We'll see. That's what he said. But he went on to talk about we're going to have to put people on universal basic income because they won't have any jobs. Robots and artificial intelligence is going to take it from them. And while, I think one of the things I enjoy about our show, and I hear it from guests as well as audience members alike, one of the things I like about our show is that I keep a laptop computer next to me. And when a guest says something, I go look it up. And if I can find a video or a tweet or whatever about it, I bring that into the show. In other words, we do live production. We're producing the show in real time. And you don't see many talk show hosts doing that. I don't know why, because to me, it keeps me from getting bored and falling asleep. As I said last night, I like being able to keep it moving. So when he said something last night about robots stocking shelves, I'm like, do we really have that capability yet? Well, I went and looked it up, and actually we do. There are now robots that are able to stock the shelves. We also have drones. I found video in companies, drones that will fly down the aisle at your big box stores, fly down the aisle at the very top of the shelf, so way up toward the ceiling, fly down each aisle, and they are automatically taking inventory. In other words, every product has a tag on it, RFID or whatever, and boom, inventory's done. We'll get your response on the other side. We're not changing courses. Now, we are who we are. We're committed to the truth that we are committed to. Worldview Tube is a broadcast network that I started in 2006, but it's based on my 35 years as an author and speaker and commentator. Worldview Tube is here to defend the truth of a Christian worldview. And we believe we can apply it to all areas of life, like law, science, economics, history, family, social issues, education, religion, major issues.
At worldviewtube.com, we provide news from around the globe that isn't typically covered by mainstream media. Visit worldviewtube.com to watch our experts and analysts discuss all your favorite topics on our 24/7 live stream. Explore our extensive collection of unfiltered and uncensored content from 35 years of production. Go to worldviewtube.com today. Also find us on all of these major platforms and download our Worldview Tube mobile app.
Hello, I'm... All right, welcome back. Glad you're with us. Worldview Radio, our website, worldviewradio.com, worldviewradio.com. Don't forget, we are going to have Dr. Andy Woods, myself, and Aaron Lavarco in the building at the Waukesha Expo Center on April 15th. That's a Tuesday night, April 15th, and it's free, but you do have to register so we can put out enough seats. We now, I'm told, have over 800 people registered thus far. So please keep promoting it. Let's fill it up, the floor and the balcony as well. You can register for free, and you have to register everyone you're bringing with you. Okay, so it means you have to go in and register each person by name, and you can use your same email address over and over. That's not a problem. But if you're registering yourself and your wife, then register yourself, go back in, use the same email, and then put in your wife's name. Or if the wife is registering the husband, we got to get the whole group registered. Okay, so that way each person has a chair. Okay, so again, full details at worldviewtube.com/events, worldviewtube.com/events. Okay, April 15th, that's a Tuesday night, and it will start at 6:30. We moved the start time back to 6:30. Congressman Glenn Grothman will also be with us in the building and greet the crowd as well. So it's going to be a great night, that's for sure. Worldviewtube.com/events. Jim Schneider is going to be there as well, and he's going to open it up in prayer, make some comments. And it's just going to be a great little reunion for all of us. We haven't done a Worldview rally in 7 years. So we're excited about that. They had to go and pick up, I don't know what quantity now. The other day was 4,000 of these little business cards that are free. They had to go pick up more yesterday. I didn't hear how many they printed, but they had to go. They've already burned through that 4,000 that they just picked up not even a week ago, which is a good thing. My wife said there's a lot of people calling too, Brandon, as well, not just ordering them online. They are free, worldviewstore.com. And if you'd like to get a packet of 20, we'll send them to you, and allows you to promote the podcast and pass them out to your family and friends, or maybe people you meet in the grocery store. Maybe you're getting your hair cut. Ladies, you're getting your hair done. You're talking to the beautician, and you're like, hey, if you think that, you're having a conversation, you're going to be able to maybe tell, yes, I think they would like what Brandon does. No, I don't think they would. Well, then you probably better not do it, or you might go out of there with your hair being purple or pink or something. But if you think that they're going to like what we have to offer, you could say, hey, after our conversation, I think you might enjoy this network, and hand them a card. So I really appreciate all of you that are doing this, because it's a great way for us to introduce the network to new people and the show to new people, VCY America to new people. So again, thank you for doing that. Speaking of VCY, be sure to stay tuned for Crosstalk coming up at the top of the hour at vcy.org, vcy.org, with your host, Jim Schneider, on over 100 outlets nationwide, America's original Christian talk program since the 1970s. All right, so Dr. Andy Woods joins us. Dr. Woods, I went to the website after he's talking about robots, thinking, how advanced are we on these things? And sure enough, there's a company out there, they're offering robots that actually can restock the shelves. As I said, they even have a company that has a drone that flies at the ceiling level, just underneath the ceiling, up and down the aisle of the big box stores. And in a matter of minutes, all your inventory is done. You know how many employees it used to take? And they would sometimes stay overnight. We're staying overnight for multiple hours to take inventory. No more. Your robots and drones are doing it in a matter of minutes. And then this is what led Elon to say at the World Government Summit in UAE, we're going to have to go to universal basic income, because a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would say it's already happening in California. All you have to do is go visit and go to like an airport fast food place, and, good luck actually talking to a real person. Everything's automated. And of course, as that happens, it pushes ordinary people outside of the workforce. And Elon Musk is very much a mixed bag as far as I'm concerned. On one end of the stick, I really love all the things he's doing with Doge and discovering all of the waste, fraud, and abuse. But on the other end of the stick, he talks this way. He talks like a globalist. He talks about putting a piece of metal in everybody's head at some point. As you just mentioned, at Davos, he's talking about UBI, which is part of the Klaus Schwab agenda. By the way, if we ever go to UBI, God forbid, then freedom as we know it is over. Because if you step out of line or post something online that the New World Order doesn't like, they can just electronically, shut off your access to finances and money. So I guess I see a lot of the things that Elon Musk, as much as I appreciate a lot of the good work he's doing, I see a lot of the stuff he's doing also is actually, whether he realizes or not, is indirectly setting up the mark of the beast system. Because you displace humans and you put them in a position where they're dependent upon the government for money, and that's your answer for global control. That's how you control the population. And of course, the robots have no free will; they're already under your control. And so this whole thing, is setting up the mark of the beast system, Revelation 13, and I'm hoping that we'll be raptured, before we see much more of this.
Yeah. And it's ironic that right now I am in Revelation 13 on Sunday nights. I think I got to about verse 8 or 9. I'll pick it back up, Lord willing, this Sunday evening, 8 p.m. Central at worldviewtube.com. It airs on VCY's TV 30 in Milwaukee, on Thursday nights, I believe, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. I know that in part, but I also was reminded of it because my wife said last night, Brandon, someone just sent in a text or an email, I don't know which one, talking about how much they're enjoying your Revelation series. And I said, well, that's because it's Thursday night, and I think it just got over on TV 30. So they were watching it on TV 30 and then sent in a communication, and we appreciate that. Because I'll tell you, folks, I spent a lot of hours studying and preparing for that. In my last lesson, I quoted none other than the Dr. Andy Woods, who has taught through it many times. But ironically, here we are now on Sunday nights in Revelation chapter 13, which is where we see the whole mark of the beast. We are in a weird situation because we want to cheer some of the things Elon's doing, and then in other parts we're like, "Ugh, this is not good." Like you said, it's kind of a mixed story here. I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see. And of course, as you know, his whole grok is in my backyard. Okay? It is just a few miles from where I'm sitting here in the Mid-South. It's at the old Electrolux building. And Logan was reading the other day that they've put in so many computers that they said they were using 2/3 of the coolant in America at one point. They were ordering it up 2/3 of the coolant with semi-trucks backing up, pumping in the coolant to keep these computers cool because they were running so fast and quick. I don't know if have you played around with Grok yet? Have you asked it questions yet, Dr. Woods?
No, I mean, I'm the kind of guy that has trouble finding the on and off switch of things. So unfortunately, I've got people around me like you and my wife and folks at church that understand all this stuff.
All right, here's what I want you to do. Here's what I want you to do between now and next week, if you would, please. Have your wife get you in on Grok and ask it questions about Dr. Andy Woods. And start, oh really, and I'm serious. Start watching how much information comes back and watch how fast it comes back. I'm talking seconds. Seconds. Now, if Grok says something about you that's not true, provide the information back and tell them you're wrong and provide the information. And if you can, provide a link on a website where that information is stored and then hit return. And again, within a second or two, it will say, oh, I am sorry. Upon further investigation, you are right. This thing is learning, okay? And it will even tell you, I'm still learning. But it's not, I mean, if you want to talk about mark of the beast, okay, the ability for this computer system that is still fairly new as far as the technology and spinning up and learning, it's very scary what it already knows and what it already can figure out is true, or even you argue with it and tell it you're wrong and provide the information. Within seconds, it goes to search the website you provided and verify the information and then is willing to correct itself. I mean, it is, again, I would venture to guess a lot of the people in our audience, probably some of the older people, have not gone and fooled around with Grok yet. But I'll tell you something else. I haven't done it, but I understand there is a, what is it called, Logan? The uncensored version. There's a version of it, Logan. He's trying to remember. But there's a version where it's basically uncensored. And some of the guys in the control room tried out what does that mean? And it spat back to us answers, and it was directed at us, and it pulled from our worldview to argue with us. It knew we were Worldview Tube, is what I'm telling you. It wasn't like you asked it a question, you're some random person. It knew who we were. And it answered back uncensored and started quoting Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, at us. It knew who we were. And then it made some blasphemous comments back at us. I'm telling you, it knew exactly what our biblical religious convictions were and started using that to insult with its answers back. I was stunned when they read to me the response, Dr. Woods. And this is new.
Well, I mean, what does that remind you of? When, as you're talking, I'm
It reminds
thinking
me of the
Revelation.
image being set up in the temple that speaks words of blasphemy.
Yeah, that's where I was going. It reminds me of Revelation 13, verse 15, a talking statue, which is what Revelation chapter 13, verse 15 is predicting. And how can you talk? I guess you can talk without conversing, but it's much easier to talk in a conversation. And so I think the development of AI is rapidly materializing into the mark of the beast system that we see personified in verse 15 of chapter 13. I mean, you're studying the passage right now, verses 16 through 18. I think UBI plays a role in all of this. And the interesting thing about technology is it doesn't devolve. You know, it goes to a certain place and then it doubles, and then it doubles again, and it doubles again. And you get to a point where these technological breakthroughs are almost happening at light speed.
Yes.
And I've seen several quotes by the authors, some of the authors of AI, originators of it. After they retire, they send out these warnings saying, you know, we need to shut this stuff down now while we still have time, or else we're going to become slaves, you know, to this entire system.
I want to try to find that video, Logan, play to the audience. Okay, I think I just found it. Let's see, is this the longer version? Okay, here it is. Here it is. In fact, no, what? Tell you what, there's a break coming up. I don't want to interrupt it. I want people to hear a fairly recent clip from the World Government Summit of Elon talking about universal basic income. And when you do this, okay, listen now, Doge is showing all the waste, all the fraud. And as Patrick Wood and I talked yesterday, how do you eliminate the waste and the fraud? Nobody gets a check or a digital deposit unless we verify who you are. We got Social Security checks going right now to people that are, you know, older than the country. So how do you stop this? You give everybody a digital ID, as the World Economic Forum has been bragging about since 2018, one of their graphics, where you don't vote, you don't get online, you can't do online commerce, you can't travel unless you have it. Patrick Wood made a very interesting point. You won't be able to log on. So if you think you're going to go off the grid, you're not. You're not going to be able to log on unless you enter your biometrics. And as soon as you do, the beast will know exactly where you are. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview. All right, welcome back. Glad you're with us. All right, so Logan went to look at that Grok Unhinged, I guess is what it was called. He can't find it. So maybe they got so many complaints, maybe their hand was revealed too early, but he can't find it now. Well, they did, and they told me all about it, and were reading it back to me. So they can disappear it, but we saw it. Now, as I was talking before the break there, Dr. Woods, you get one of these digital IDs that are required to get online. to get a bank account, to vote, to travel. If you think you're going to disappear and pop up somewhere else on a new computer, someone else's computer, you're not going to be able to get on without your biometrics, your eye, your voice, your fingerprint, or all three. We're going to triple validate you are who you are. So anytime someone pops up online, AI is going to be able to search the world over and know Andy Woods is no longer in Texas. He's now in, Thailand. Because without it, you're not getting online. Now we identify where you're at. And in that conversation yesterday, I found it very interesting as we study Revelation 12, and I think back where Jesus in Matthew 24 also speaks of it and references the book of Daniel, which I find fascinating. Jesus, again, quoting scripture, quoting Daniel, showing the veracity, authenticity of the Old Testament prophet. He himself quotes it, gives it, his, obviously, one more time, seal of approval with his verbal teaching. And in Daniel, we have this, desolation of abomination. Jesus in Matthew 24 tells the Jews, get out of town, get out of Dodge, flee to the wilderness, don't turn back for your coat. And you're thinking, well, there are many reasons to do that. The Antichrist, who I think now is Satan possessed, is really coming after him as he's been banished from into the heavens. He's in the throne room of God. And I think now Satan possesses Antichrist after the assassination or whatever happened, his deadly wound, mortal wound. And he's coming after the nation of Israel. And one reason they maybe I came up with this thinking yesterday with Andy or with Patrick Wood talking to him. Maybe one reason they go through there is not only for physical safety, but you've been there. I highly doubt when they go to Petra, they're plugging into a bunch of electricity and turning on their iPhones and charging their phones and computers. And guess what? They've now gone off the grid. No wonder they can't, get food. I was in prison, you visited me. I was hungry, you fed me. They're off the grid, and they're literally in an area in the wilderness off the grid. That's what it's going to take if you even hope to escape the AI system tracking down those who become believers in the tribulation. What are your thoughts of that?
Well, I mean, of the many scenarios out there, that's a very credible one. The interesting thing about prophecy is it just gives us the end game, gives us the final product. It doesn't tell us how we're going to get to that final product. And everything we do in terms of figuring out how we're going to get there is speculation. I would call it sanctified speculation, stage setting. But, I would just say this, the closer we get to this fulfillment of these events, the more plausible a lot of different scenarios like yours, are going to become. And I think you've got your finger on one, that could very well be one of maybe, I wouldn't say many scenarios, but maybe just a few scenarios. But by the time it's all said and done, we're going to be shocked at how literally these things came to pass. Mm-hmm.
Here is that Musk conversation, Elon, at the World Government Summit in the United Arab Emirates with for radio. The guy that he's talking to is wearing, a full Saudi Arabian headgear and the whole nine yards, the robe. So this again, we're going to watch the Muslims help us bring in world government. Here we go.
There will be fewer and fewer jobs that a robot cannot do better.
Okay, there will be fewer and fewer jobs that a robot cannot do better. Just in case you didn't get that.
There will be fewer and fewer jobs that a robot cannot do better.
Okay.
What to do about mass unemployment? This is going to be a massive social challenge. And I think ultimately we will have to have some kind of universal basic income. I don't think we're going to have a choice.
Universal basic income.
Universal basic income. I think it's going to be necessary.
So it means that unemployed people will be paid across the globe.
Yeah.
Because there is no job, machine, robot is taking over.
That's simply and I want to be clear that these are not things that I think that I wish would happen. These are simply things that I think probably will happen. And if my assessment is correct and they probably will happen, then we need to say, what are we going to do about it? And I think some kind of a universal basic income is going to be necessary. Now, the output of goods and services will be extremely high. So with automation, there will come abundance. There will be almost everything will get very cheap. I think I think we'll just end up doing a universal basic income. It's going to be necessary. The harder challenge, much harder challenge, is how do people then have meaning? Like a lot of people, they derive their meaning from their employment. So if you don't have, if you're not needed, if there's not a need for your labor, how do you, what's the meaning? Do you have meaning? Do you feel useless? That's a much harder problem to deal with.
And of course, our free market system is largely based on work. I know this is not something that a lot of people are taught, but our free market system is really based on work. Something has value in part, not only because it is a tradable commodity or a storehouse of value, but it has worth because it is derived from some sort of work, right? You have to work to be an architect and build a building. You have to work if you're a plumber installing all of the pipes in a house. You have to work if you're a computer programmer building the program. You have to work if you're a pastor who's studying, rightfully dividing the word of truth, to teach it on Sunday morning. So, and you just go down the line, work, work, work. And isn't that interesting? Because God, even in the garden before the fall, commanded them to be involved in work. Now he's saying, you will have no real purpose. You just now have pulled out the underpinning and part of the free market system, work, which really moves us to, again, big government, big business merging together. You're not working on a free market system anymore. And you think that nihilism is big today, life has no ultimate meaning or purpose, just wait till this happens. And even as a non-believer, he's just saying, this is going to be a problem because people are not going to see any real purpose for being here on earth. No wonder suicide and drugs. And we see this pharmakia in the scriptures, right? In the book of Revelation, it seems as they are involved in some kind of pharmakia and witchcraft. No wonder pharmaceuticals and drugs maybe have become so prolific during the Babylon period. Dr. Woods?
Well, I mean, just a couple of things. You move into this system and you take away this is one of the divine institutions, the institution of the institution of labor, and you're taking away one of the things that it means to be human. And so does this not pave the way into what they today are calling transhumanism?
Yes.
You know, our development into something that's not fully human based on the evolutionary upward ascent of man into deity or whatever. The other thing that's interesting is he's not talking about national basic income. He's talking about universal basic income.
Good point.
The whole concept of nations just disappeared. And I can't help but being moved by that logo as he's talking. I mean, right there next to him is this, yeah, there it is, World Government Summit. I mean, I remember when George H.W. Bush used the word New World Order, there was such a backlash against it that he quit using it. And now it's just right out there in the open where you can openly talk about these things and have a logo right next to you saying we're having this summit or this conference to bring in world government, which is exactly where God said we would end up just before the return of Jesus to the earth. Humanity would have moved into, you know, what we would call one world tyranny. Daniel 7 verse 23 and many other passages predict that.
Let's open the phone lines. 1-800-347-9829. 1-800-347-9829. Your thoughts, your comments, your questions. 1-800-347-9829. Let's come back to Donald Trump because he did put out an executive order making English the official language in the U.S. So this is not something you do if you're interested in globalism, right? He's trying to highlight, hey, to be a nation, we have to have our own currency, our own laws, our own culture, and our own language. Dr. Woods?
Yeah, and what's interesting is Musk, as he's saying all this stuff, I have an article right in there in the stack of stuff. It might be the second one or third one down, but it basically is talking about him saying, let's get out of the United Nations and NATO. You know, we as nationalists, constitutionalists have been arguing for our exit from the UN a long time. So this is why Musk is so he's so tricky. I mean, he says a lot of things that are very anti-New World Order, but then when you play some of the recordings that you just played, he's basically saying this is where we're going to end up, in a New World Order. And so it's that's the article there. That's from the Geller report. So I don't know. It's a time of a lot of confusion.
Yeah, and you've got Senator Mike Lee calling for us to leave NATO. President Trump's talking about leaving NATO. Dr. Woods, I said on the air the other day, I'm all for kicking the UN out of New York, out of the country, and I would invite them to go to Babylon, because that would help speed up the Bible prophecy scenario and stage setting. And you and I have not backed down. We're one of the few people who have not backed down. My book, The Coming Religious Reich, I make a whole case that it's in Babylon. I wrote that book before I knew you, and unbeknownst to me, you were arguing the same thing. Unbeknownst to you, I was arguing the same thing. So you and I were both arguing before we even knew each other. No. When the Bible says it's going to be in Babylon, 58 miles south of Baghdad, it's going to be in Babylon, okay? Now, will the world government be a Eurocentric world government, a revived Roman Empire? Yeah, just like Cecil Rhodes wanted a Eurocentric world government of the Rhodes Scholarship Program. But I think Babylon is going to play a major role. And we got mocked. You and I have been mocked for that. And now we see this Fa port going right through Iraq, not far from Babylon, which is going to be one of the biggest commercial ports in the world. So I'm all for the UN leaving, and maybe this push for getting out of the UN is again providentially going to exit them from the U.S. as I have in my book, The Coming Religious Reich, quoting 2 Army War College professors who say, move it to Babylon. I mean, I'm like, really? That's what they said, right?
Yeah, it's just a matter of symmetry. I mean, the Tower of Babel was once there in between the Euphrates and the Tigris, modern-day Iraq. God disrupted that project. Satan is going to rebuild it in that same territory, only for it to be destroyed again by the second advent of Jesus.
Let's come back and open the phone lines, 1-800-347-9829. Dr. Woods, his website is andywoodsministries.org. And you can hear him each and every weekend on Saturday and Sundays, 12 noon at Worldview Tube. Remember now, Dr. Woods and I will be in Milwaukee on Tuesday evening, Lord willing, April 15th. The tickets are free, but you do need to get them, worldviewtube.com/events. Be right back. Hello, I'm Brandon House. Melissa and I have been taking Bella Grace, this powerful elixir, since last fall, 2023. The results have been amazing. My hands would crack and bleed, deep cuts and cracks every winter for years. No matter what we did, we couldn't get them to stop cracking and bleeding. This year, I took Bella Grace, no cracking, no bleeding. My acid reflux, gone. Haven't had to take a Pepsid. My hair growth, the last 2 times I had my hair cut, the lady had to use thinning shears on my hair. That's amazing. We've also received incredible feedback from you, our listening audience, and the impact it's had for you. This is loaded with astaxanthin. That's a powerful antioxidant. Collagen, but top-grade collagen. Studies show 95% of it is being absorbed in the body because of the way they develop it. Then we have something called cat's claw. That's an anti-inflammatory from a vine in Peru. It's the bark, and it's an anti-inflammatory. There are about 80 clinical trials on Bella Grace. Please get a subscription now and save. MelissaHousebg.com. All right, let's go to the phone lines. 1-800-347-9829. 1-800-347-9829. Kyle, line 1. Hi, Kyle. Thanks for calling in.
Hey, Brendan. Thank you. With the AI, you look at the Jewish people and, being sick of getting kicked off land and kicked out of certain jobs and whatnot. They went into more technical lawyers, accountants, doctors, so they wouldn't have to worry about being, unseated from a practice or whatnot. But now you're seeing with the advent of AI, you're not going to need lawyers. You can AI doctor. So that's another way that the Antichrist system could pinpoint and target God's chosen people.
Ah, that's a very good analysis. Dr. Woods?
What you quoted earlier, people are going to have to help the Jews out to demonstrate that they're sheep in the tribulation period. Got to help them out financially in prison. And what the person just said there, the caller just said, is a possible scenario why the Jews in the tribulation period are underemployed, unemployed, in need of having their basic needs met.
Let's go to Anonymous, line 2. Anonymous from Texas. Thanks for calling in.
Yeah,
Hi, Anonymous.
So, Brandon, you said thanks for taking my call. You said that we don't know how these things are going to unfold, but the last oracle of Daniel, which is sealed to the time of the end, but it could be unsealed by now. Some people might know how things are going to unfold.
So help me out here. Is there a question I agree with you. We can get an idea of how they're going to unfold to a degree, but is there a specific point that you want us to address?
Well, yeah, the last oracle of Daniel is sealed till the time of the end, but since we are approaching the time of the end, some of us may already know how it's going to unfold, and maybe even written books about it, but maybe the Holy Spirit told us not to publish it yet.
Okay. All right. Dr. Woods?
Well, there is a truth, I call it not progressive revelation, but progressive illumination, specifically related to prophetic passages. Is there a question?
Okay,
that the closer humanity drifts towards the end time scenario, the clearer and clearer those passages become. For example, we've used on this show many times, how is the whole world going to see the slaying of the two witnesses? You go back 100 years and you watch commentators, struggle with that one.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them just allegorized it. Well, we don't have to allegorize it because we know exactly how it's going to happen because we have the technology in place. So in that sense, I agree with what the caller's saying. You get more understanding the closer you get to the end time scenario. And that's what the moving to and fro is. It's not taking a cruise line or the internet. Moving to and fro is reading.
Mm-hmm.
And people are going to start reading their Bible and looking at the world and saying, aha, that's what that was talking about. And we understand not because we're smarter than prior generations. It's just we're living in the right time period.
Phone lines are lit up. Let's go to Pam, line 1 in Arkansas. Hi, Pam. Hi, Pam.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Yes. I am looking forward to talking to both of you about Babylon. I have a question. I agree with you, but I also read people like Dr. Heinsohn, who is now with the Lord, but right. I really appreciated what he had to say, and others, and they're saying it can't be anything but like Rome. And I see what you're saying, but what their point in this one book that I read from him was that the early church and the early church fathers believed it was Rome. And I was just wondering if anyone had any information about that, because to me that's kind of important. They're so close to it. So
Great question. I'll respond, then Dr. Woods can respond. There are guys we respect. Remember now, all of us have different positions. We don't agree on everything, but we agree on the vast majority, right? Dr. DeYoung and I didn't agree on everything. Ed Hines and I didn't agree on everything, but both of them have sat at this news desk and taught, and we appreciate and respect and have learned from these men, right? There are areas where we disagree, but on the bulk of it, we agree. Now, some of these guys have taken Revelation chapter 17, the 7 mountains, and they go right away, oh, Rome. But if you read the passage and you read other passages, even back in Daniel, as Daniel is a foundation for Revelation, the 7 mountains are 7 kings. who have not the seven mountains are seven kings, and it goes on to talk about the seven nations. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. So we see this in Daniel. We see Daniel 2, Daniel 7, whether it's Nebuchadnezzar, whether it's the dream of Daniel himself. So they take that 7 mountains and go right away, oh, that must be the 7 mountains of Rome. But the scripture tells you what they are. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. At the time John was writing, the one that was Rome. The one that's yet to come is a revived Roman Empire. So to me, the text is very clear in multiple places what we're talking about. That doesn't mean Rome may not be involved any more than the Southern Baptist Convention in Nashville will be involved. But I see people pick up and go after the Church of Rome, and I understand why, particularly the early church fathers who are being slaughtered through the Inquisition. But let me tell you, I'm not so sure there's a whole lot of there's pretty well equal apostasy between the Protestant denominations, many of them, and the Catholic Church. But I get frustrated at times when people go after the Catholic Church, but they act like we don't have a complete apostasy coming out of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is basically the evangelical Vatican in Nashville. So I don't think it's that Rome can't be involved, but it's going to be all these groups involved. But I think the scripture is pretty clear what those 7 hills are. Dr. Woods?
Well, I would say Dr. Ed Heinzen is a great guy. He's with the Lord now. I mean, I served on the same board with him at the pre-trib study group. But the bottom line, and although I agree with him on 99% of issues, he took an allegorical, and I don't know how else to say it, an allegorical view of the name Babylon in Revelation 17 and 18. He did what was the equivalent of what replacement theologians do, where they say, well, the church means Israel or something like that. And he just substituted the word Rome for the word Babylon with no textual basis for doing so. I mean,
but you agree
Rome
those 7 mountains are referring to these nations, 5 that have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is to come.
Yeah, and it doesn't even say there are 7 hills, as in the 7 hills of Rome. The Greek is Oros, mountains. And as you just said, those refer to various kings or kingdoms. So the whole, and please get my book, Babylon, the Prophetic Bookends of History. It'll help you with all these issues.
You'll find it there. Take care. All right, let's come back to Dr. Woods. So, Dr. Woods, this again is something I also saw Jimmy DeYoung, as much as I love Jimmy DeYoung, this is something I would see Jimmy do as well. And I don't know why, when the passage tells you exactly what's going on there. I mean, so you don't have to guess. In fact, I'll even, let's see, I can even bring it up. I have it in my PowerPoint from the other night. I'll bring up the actual passage that we're talking about here. Get there. All right, here we go. Almost there, guys. Now, the beast, which I saw, was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. Sounds very similar to what we saw going on with Daniel 7 in the vision of Daniel, right? So we continue going back. We can go to Revelation 17, verses 12 through 13. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who've received no kingdom as of yet, meaning at the time John was writing. They receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind. They'll give their part of the beast. So you got the 10 horns, which I think, and you and I both agree, we think this is the world being divided into 10 different regions. And then we go back on to Revelation 17, 9 through 11. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other is yet to come, which again, I think fits with Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, the Persian Empire, the Empire of Greece, and then Rome at the time John was writing, and then the revived Roman Empire. So I don't know why they go to that when the text tells you it's not Rome. It tells you that there are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other is yet to come. So I don't know why, and they're not the only ones that do that. I think Walford does this too.
Yeah, he doesn't have it right. He has it right in chapter 18, but not 17. And I think Jimmy DeYoung was like that also. It's good in 18, not 17. And real quickly, I'll tell you exactly why they do it. It goes back to the Protestant reformers, Luther and Calvin. And I quote all of this in my little book. And I'm not here to sell a book, but I condensed all the data in a short read. Babylon, you can find it on my website, Amazon, wherever. Babylon, the prophetic bookends, or the bookends of prophetic history. It dissects all these arguments. But the whole issue came to Luther, who started to call the Pope, who he was in polemical war with, theologically, he started to call the Pope the Antichrist. And he started to call Vatican City Babylon. And the more he did that, the more popular he got with the rank and file. In other words, as we like to say, he discovered that would preach. And so that from that point on, it stuck that somehow those scriptures that you're teaching on your Sunday night show, I guess you're going to be moving into 17 and 18 in a few weeks. They're deliteralized for that reason. We're kind of living in the wake of the theological giant Luther, who was really good on a lot of topics, but he wasn't good on this. He was very sloppy, and he used it as sort of a weapon against his theological opponents. So ever since that point in time, that allegorical view that Babylon really means Rome has sort of stuck, and it's very hard for people to climb out of that historical wake, so to speak.
And I appreciate your saying that. Thank you. And of course, when it talks about this woman who is involved in sitting on these 7 heads, as I understand it, what it's saying is that this revived Roman Empire is a collection of these previous empires that in many regards are still here. The nation of Greece is still here, Iran, which we would have called Persia. A lot of these nations, they're still here in some form or another. Not to mention, of course, you have the Babylonian religious systems, the mother-son cult, which is now spread throughout all the world, which I think is going to be why the mother of harlots, and she regathers her kids again in Babylon. So it all fits together because one is built upon the other even through the course of time. Would you agree?
Yeah, and the key verse that unlocks this whole thing, and people typically skip right over it because it's a little parenthetical comment, I believe it's in Daniel 7, verse 13, where it talks about these various beasts, and it says, each one continued to live on after the other had conquered it. It doesn't say that exactly, but that's a loose paraphrase.
What is the passage again for those who want to look it up?
Yeah, look up Daniel 7, look up verse 13. I think that's where it is, maybe 12. I'm kind of going
here. That's all right, I got
here.
it. Daniel 7, let's go about verse 13. For the rest of these beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet the lives were prolonged for a season and a time. That's verse 12.
That's it. That's the verse I'm looking for. So it's like Rome, and every historian agrees with this. Rome conquered Greece politically, but Greece conquered Rome culturally. I mean, all the Romans did is they took the Grecian deities and they renamed them. So the god of war under Greece became Mars, under the Roman system. And so that's a chain that continues all the way through history. And by the time you...
Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
For people who may not know, I mean, they give advice to the military about what is lawful and what isn't. Not surprisingly, there's been some backlash to those who are worried about their removal. One Georgetown law professor says this: Trump also firing the Army, Navy, and Air Force JAGs. In some ways, that's even more chilling than firing the 4 stars. It's what you do when you're planning to break the law. You get rid of any lawyers who might try to slow you down. Your response to her?
Yeah, I don't know who Rosa is and what her hyperbole is all about. Ultimately, we want lawyers who give sound constitutional advice and don't exist to attempt to be roadblocks to anything that happens in their spots. What we know about these TJAGs, they're called TJAGs inside the military. Traditionally, they've been elected by each other or chosen by each other, which is exactly how it works often with the chairman as well. Small group of insulated officers who perpetuate the status quo. Well, guess what? Status quo hasn't worked very well at the Pentagon. It's time for fresh blood. So we're going to open.
The military service JAGs, they were fired by Secretary Hegseth for a reason. That's the big question. Welcome back to Whistleblower Wednesday here. The Rob Maness Show is live on Worldview Tube, our X Spaces simulcast, Rumble, YouTube, Truth Social Plus, Amazon Fire, and Roku. Well, that's the big question, folks. What is the reason all 3 of the service's top lawyers were removed in the first DOD Friday night firing, as we call them these days? Well, we're going to work through that answer very specifically today because there's a lot going on with the weaponization of the military legal system. Yes, I said it, and you shouldn't take my words lightly because I'm someone who was privileged to wield court-martial authority and supervise JAG officers as a senior commander. I once had absolute faith in the JAG Corps and our system of military justice, but something has gone wrong somewhere. I'm sure it did happen over time, as these things do, including when I was in the service. But the public culmination of this disaster was when whistleblowers revealed our troops in America's military had their rights stripped from them. We see today open law breaking by commanders and a strong record of really bad legal advice by the JAG Corps to those commanders. These actions have resulted in an estimated nearly 100,000 service members being forced to leave doing what they love, serving our country, members who've been physically devastated and are not being compensated for those injuries, and multiple unintended consequences damaging recruiting, which is coming back up, retention, and most importantly, damaging our readiness to fight and win America's wars. Well, I'm honored to have 2 guests today to help us understand why this firing needed to be done and get to the underlying situation so we can talk about it and get it out in the open. Commander Rob Green is an active duty U.S. Navy commander. He's the author of the book, Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines. He's the author of the Declaration of Military Accountability and was recently honored by President Trump with a Defenders of Freedom Award down at Mar-a-Lago. My second guest today is retired U.S. Navy Captain Dan McCarthy. He is a Naval Academy graduate, was a surface warfare officer who was selected, which is a competitive selection, for the law education program. He graduated from Duke Law School with honors and graduated at the master's level from George Washington Law with the highest honors you can get. He's also served in the Navy JAG Corps, including multiple tours as trial counsel in field commands around the world, was an executive assistant to the Judge Advocate General, and was special assistant for legal issues to the Secretary of the Navy, and was a commanding officer. That's a big resume for a U.S. Navy lawyer. Dan's post-military career is just as exceptional. He served veterans and city government. He's been a chief assistant state attorney and served at the Court of Appeals level. He's currently the federal special master at the D.C. Circuit Court, assisting with Foreign Service Immunity Act claims filed against, guess who? The Islamic Republic of Iran, the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. And those claims are by U.S. military personnel killed and injured in Iraq. Rob, welcome back to the show. And Dan, welcome to the Rob Maness Show for the first time. Thank you both for spending some time with us.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Yes, I agree, Colonel.
Well, guys, let me pitch this first question out to both of you and just give me your takes based on your experience and what you've seen, what the core issue is as for these firings of all 3 service JAGs all at the same time.
Well, I normally would need to defer to the gentleman with the significant resume that you just read. What an honor to be here with him, talking to you today. But I'll just give a quick one-liner on that. We have, over the last almost couple decades, lost touch with what the Constitution fundamentally means, and the law profession in the Navy is due for a reset. And I'll start with that, and then I'll turn it over.
Well,
Dan,
thank you, Rob.
based on your, go ahead.
I said, thank you, Colonel. And I appreciate the introduction. That was yesterday. What we're here to talk about now is the brave men and women patriots that serve every day, and our concern that they receive the best possible support, mentoring, legal advice, and leadership. And I think that we have reason to be concerned about that.
Yeah, we do. And as Rob mentioned, and Secretary Hegseth mentioned in the little opening clip there, we want attorneys that are, Judge Advocate General attorneys that will give sound constitutional advice and not be wedded to things like institutional norms, wedded to protecting the institution itself. And I think that's a big part of the issue, Dan. You've served at every level, I think. Can you give us some insight historically as to how we might have gotten here based on what you saw?
Well, I certainly know how it's changed. And I can tell you, I had the great benefit or opportunity or blessing to serve for Secretary of the Navy John Dalton from 1992 to 1998. I had 6 years as his legal advisor, which is an extended period. Most that position is usually a one-year position. It just happened, if you'll think back to the early 90s, that tailhook came along. And the more I worked with Secretary Dalton on tailhook, the more he wanted me to stay. And he wanted me to remain part of his team as long as he was the Secretary of the Navy. And one of the things that's critical, if you're going to be the legal advisor in situations like this, is not to say yes, but to say no when no is the right answer. Very often the military can get caught up a little bit in what they're trying to accomplish, or enthusiastically believe that we can do this, this, and this. The judge advocate's role is to tell the secretary what the law is, and then give him his options and possibly make a recommendation as to which option is appropriate. What appears to have happened is that we brought in a number of people for whatever reason. I've had some reason to believe that perhaps it was a focus on DEI and woke sort of thinking. We brought in a group of JAGs that became yes men. And yes men do not serve either their leader well or the men and women that put their uniform on every day and go out there and put their life at risk for the safety and freedom of this country. So once we had a few issues that seemed to show that very clearly. One was the mandatory vaccination program. I knew as soon as I heard it that can't be legal. And I was consulted by a few people, and I said, just, fight it. It's not right. There is no legal authority to separate people for not taking an experimental drug. And some tried to argue back to me at the time that it's not an experimental drug, that it's FDA approved. And even if the two drugs, the one that was FDA approved and the one that was being utilized in the Department of Defense, that they were close enough. But I can tell you, for instance, I had the benefit of having some great children. And my first son, John, went to the Naval Academy, and he was a surface officer, and he was a doctor. And as soon as it happened, he called me and he said, Dad, don't take it. It's not FDA approved. And what they're offering is a substitute that is not legally approved. He didn't take it in his work with a large medical organization that wanted their doctors to take the vaccine. And he resisted that, although it did not have career consequences for him. Instead, though, we put career consequences on men and women that had served valiantly in combat, had put their life on the line, had carried out men and women that had been hurt, and had just served as nobly and valiantly as you can serve in the military. So to suddenly give them a do or die kind of proposal, and then to know that it wasn't legal and that somebody needed to stand up and say that's not legal. And guess who that person should have been? The judge advocate. He should have read the law, and he should have come into his boss and said, sir, this is close, but it's not good enough. And you cannot create a mandatory program and terminate careers and affect people's lives dramatically unless you're right about the law. And in this instance, the leaders needed good judge advocates who understood that their role was not just to say yes because everybody's kind of feeling that way. And the momentum is, oh, of course we can do this. And politicians were telling them they could do it. The role of the judge advocate is to go read the law very, very carefully and then come back and present that to his leader, whoever that, he or she's leader, whoever that may be. And I think their failure has created a whole series of, I don't like calling them victims because they're patriots that were misserved by judge advocates whose role was to read the law, know the Constitution, and present those options to the men and women that are trying to make good decisions.
Absolutely right, sir. I got to do something here real quick. I forgot to do it before I asked you guys the first question. Let me read this disclaimer. Look, none of the comments that me or Captain McCarthy or Commander Green are saying are endorsed by the Department of Defense, the Department of the Air Force, or the Department of the Navy. We don't speak for them. We're speaking in our own right. And Rob, just to come back to you, tell the folks what the repercussions of this systemic inability of the JAG officers to say no to the commanders has been. Just refresh their memories.
Oh, it's been very painful for many service members who, for reasons of conscience, decided that they could not take these experimental products. And, we had, service members that ended up homeless. They were kicked out with days to spare from military housing. Like, hey, here's your notification, get out. We provide sometimes as long as 18 months for all judicial proceedings and all rights to be protected for service members that commit all kinds of violations, very serious crimes, and we don't treat them like we did over this vaccine mandate. We had a sailor that was reported to me, that within days of it happening, the sailor committed suicide. He was in lockdown. He was being treated terribly. He was a Navy SEAL, very capable sailor, and only jobs that he was given was doing manual labor. I was told that the last thing that this sailor did to support his country, the last job he was given was to do the yard work outside the building. He was no longer permitted to enter. These were the kinds of things that were happening to sailors, happening to service members across all branches, because the JAG Corps stopped trying to defend constitutional rights, and they started trying to find a way, loopholes and word nonsense, tried to find a way to let commanders get to yes and defend commanders from legal actions after the fact. Those are the kinds of things that were happening. And we had a number of whistleblower reprisal cases. Some of them are still ongoing. And this is not just exclusively a COVID problem. Captain McCarthy explained that very well, but we had these issues across a broad spectrum of areas.
Yeah, we got to take a commercial break. When we come back, we'll see a little clip from the fake news about the firings. But I want to continue this discussion, Rob and Captain McCarthy, about the impacts of this decision-making and take it beyond the COVID. That's a perfect segue, because this has really dramatic effects and unintended consequences that are reverberating even today. And we'll talk some more about those when we come back on the Rob Maness Show here on Whistleblower Wednesday.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
Last week, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth fired top lawyers across the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. The fired lawyers are called Judge Advocates General, or JAGs. JAGs are responsible for ensuring that the military adheres to U.S. law and international rules for war.
Georgetown law professor says this: Trump also firing the Army, Navy, and Air Force JAGs. In some ways, that's even more chilling than firing the 4 stars. It's what you do when you're planning to break the law. You get rid of any lawyers who might try to slow you down.
We want lawyers who give sound constitutional advice and don't exist to attempt to be roadblocks to anything.
During his last term, Trump suggested using the military to suppress protests and even firing upon U.S. citizens. Legal experts warn that these ideas are dangerous and potentially illegal. But with the firing of JAGs, these ideas could actually move forward. And that's the biggest concern, that by firing these top legal officers, there's a real danger that loyalty to Trump could start to outweigh loyalty to the Constitution. Military lawyers traditionally ensure that the rule of law is upheld, something that is vital for maintaining America's democratic ideals. If the military shifts its focus to loyalty to one man rather than the Constitution, the foundation of justice could crumble. This would be a dangerous shift to how the military operates. What happens when loyalty to the Constitution is replaced by loyalty to one man? What do you think?
Welcome back to the Rob Maida Show. It's Whistleblower Wednesday, and we're discussing with two great guests, U.S. Navy Commander Rob Green and retired U.S. Navy Captain and JAG Officer Dan McCarthy, the firing of the senior service JAG officers all at once, and why. And guys, I wanted to show that clip because the fake news likes to blow the warning horn. But as you could see, as he stepped through there, there's a lot of contradictions. And as we talked about in the first segment, the issue is not that the JAGs were trying to uphold the law and say no, which is what needed to happen in the COVID situation, is that they were doing the exact opposite. Am I wrong there, Dan?
Colonel, you've hit it right on the head. And I'm going to say something that I learned from my years in the E-ring that I'm sure you know quite well, Colonel. There are two kinds of courage that military people are called on to represent. One is battlefield courage. That's instinctive. That's men and women, disregarding the danger or the peril to try and complete a mission or serve the man or woman that's working next to them. And that's something that we give medals for, battlefield courage. There's a second kind of courage that lawyers face, and also administrative people in something like the E-ring that are maybe serving on a large staff. And that is, do you have the courage to say no when everybody in the room would like to hear yes? And that takes a different kind of courage, because you'll be ostracized possibly. You might be threatened with what your next job will be or something else. I could give you countless examples from my 6 years. I remember once being in the room with the Chief of Naval Operations and the Secretary of the Navy, the CNO of 4-star. I was at the time a baby captain. The CNO had a certain proposal and plan that he wanted to convince the Secretary of the Navy to do. The Secretary asked me to be present. It was just the three of us at the table. The CNO presented his idea. The problem with the idea, I understood why he wanted to do it, but there were statutes that conflicted with what he wanted to do, and it affected personnel. And after the Secretary listened to him, he looked at me and said, "Okay, JAG, Tell me what you think. And I knew it wasn't a great time to disagree with the Chief of Naval Operations in a very small meeting, but I said, Mr. Secretary, you could do that, but it would be illegal. And the Secretary just looked at the CNO and said, I'm sorry, we aren't going to follow through with this particular recommendation. When I walked out of the room, if the CNO could have strangled me, he also, and this was a rather meaningful line I've never forgotten, he said, Mr. Secretary, there's two kinds of people in this world, shooters and non-shooters. So in the CNO's mind, I was a non-shooter. I was a lawyer. But as you can see, my job was to display the administrative courage necessary to say, no, that's not legal. And what we have now, and I could not support or commend Secretary Hegseth more than for him to realize not only do I need a new chairman of a Joint Chiefs of Staff, but I need new lawyers, because I have lawyers that authorized something that's entirely unconstitutional and hit them with an injustice they didn't deserve, to have to make a decision about their career, to have to think about how the men and women they served with would see them, how their commander might view them. I mean, your health is a personal matter. And whether to take an experimental drug at the consequence of you'll be thrown out of the military is a pretty devastating decision. And the thought that lawyers who should have stepped forward and say, no, don't put them in that position. This is not a policy that you should support. Instead, we had everybody in the room wanting to do it because the political leaders wanted it done. And I'm afraid that the men and women serving in uniform were poorly served by their leaders and poorly served by the judge advocate. And I sort of laugh when I hear law professors that haven't been there and don't really understand try and give us some explanation why the recommendation by the judge advocate is so critical, and that how if a leader were to propose selecting someone differently, that would somehow be a dark moment for the military. And the truth is, you need courageous lawyers just as much as you need courageous militia folks or Rangers or SEALs or Green Beret. You need men and women that are willing to put their careers and their performance on the line when they know that something isn't right. And Secretary Hegseth did exactly what the men and women of the Department of Defense deserve, and that's lawyers that will read the law and also seek to respect the service of the men and women that they're making decisions about. In a lot of ways, lawyers have it pretty easy. We work at a desk. I lived in the Philippines 4 years. I did some other things. But what I was called on to do, compared to what pilots and submariners and surface warfare officers and Marines are called on to do, my contribution was insignificant compared to theirs. My role was to read the Constitution, study the law carefully, and provide the leaders and the men and women in uniform with correct legal advice.
Yeah, I mean, I could see where the CNO that was in that meeting is coming from. I've been a senior commander myself, and I've always told my JAGs, you advise and then I decide. But if the JAGs are advising in contrariance to the law, then and I don't know it, and I make a decision against the advice anyway, then there's a whole lot of unintended consequences that can come from that, or the other way around, where they give good advice and then I make the decision and it goes against the advice, and then I accept the responsibility for that. But you're exactly Colonel, need with that courage to be able to stand in the breach.
Colonel, it's also up to the military leader to make sure he empowers his JAG, that your job is to tell me the truth. Secretary of Navy used to always laugh with me, and if I ever have to go to jail, you're coming with me, because your job was to make sure I didn't do something illegal. And good commanders empower their subordinates to tell the truth, even if the truth may not be as popular as maybe seeing it in a way that they're kind of running with the herd. The herd wants the answer to be yes. It's easy to walk in and say yes because they'll like you more. But if you walk in and say, I'm sorry, that's not the best approach, the secretary used to always tell me, give me a better approach then, too. Don't just walk in and shake your head. Come in here and give me some different alternatives. But in the end, the commander has to empower his judge advocate general to tell the truth so that he can walk in and give the best possible advice without fear of repercussion. So I'm sure, Colonel, when you were that guy, you were making sure your JAG knew your job first and foremost is to give me constitutionally accurate legal advice. And hopefully it always matches with what I want to do.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Well, we've got a live audience here. We got a couple of questions that I'm going to take one question now for us. Our host over there is Shell. Shell, who's got a question?
We have Colonel Gannon Burton, sir.
Hey, Colonel Mass, Captains, thank you guys for your service. Hey, one thing I think it's very clear now. Thank you so much for spelling out how clear it is that this was in legal order with these vaccine mandates. Anyone being, I think where we were failed also was there were a lot of service members that came forward, refused, but then they didn't get what was clearly obvious legal advice, right, from and support through that process. And they were targeted. And then the other thing on this is that we're talking about it as if it was a failure of, it wasn't just a failure of the law here. It was a failure of observation of command because people started coming down with injuries because of the vaccines. And by the summer, we know it should have been stopped because we saw that the rates of miscarriage going up and the Navy silenced that as too. So we have a much broader, deeper thing than just fixing the JAGS piece on this. We have an active cover-up of a crime scene as far as I'm concerned. But I'd like to get your thoughts on that, and then anything you can speak to of how do we actually, fix this and get some semblance of accountability for it. Thank you.
Yeah, great observations and a question about the further unintended consequences, Rob. And you were mentioning that this goes far beyond just the COVID issue, and Colonel Burton was talking about the cascading effects, but cascading into maybe the COVID treatment and how people were treated inappropriately and illegally in that context. But it's still cascading through the force, isn't it, today? In different circumstances.
It certainly is cascading through the force. And the portion, I'm going to take a portion of that question and I'm going to defer to Captain McCarthy. The accountability piece, I definitely want Captain McCarthy to take that part of the question. But as far as the other part, the impacts of this, I would say the most important thing is trust. We have now destroyed trust with service members over this. When you had the injuries, you had the indications of the unlawfulness, made aware to the commanders, made aware through the JAG channels and other channels, through numerous, maybe probably thousands of complaints and reports internally from service members like me that stood up to this. They had an opportunity to put a pause on this, to recommend somebody with that, as Captain McCarthy describes it, administrative courage. I call it moral courage. But we did not have that at the most senior ranks. And so what ended up happening was a betrayal of trust. And now we have institutional trust that only just now we're trying to rebuild through the efforts of Secretary Hegseth and others. I would say that the JAG Corps, this was self-inflicted. Since I've gone public and I've written a book about some of this, I've had whistleblowers coming out of the woodwork to me to share additional information. And so I had, information from whistleblowers that JAGs, the last two TJAGs, apparently committed UCMJ violations and were actively covering up their own potential crimes. And so I reported that up to up through the chain of command. I got that over to the FBI as well in a report, and the NCIS has actually opened an investigation into the last two TJAGs. And so we have a problem where these two individuals had come up through the ranks and were a large part of, as was described before, they were picking who the leaders were. They were deciding who got the plum assignments. They were the ones making sure that they passed the baton on to more of their own people. And if they were disregarding the law and covering up some of their own crimes, which a full investigation needs to determine what exactly happened, but there is an active investigation right now with NCIS. So if that's the case and that's what they were doing, we have a severe problem, because the next group of people coming up behind them in the JAG Corps were the people that these people selected.
Yeah, well, we got to take another break, Captain McCarthy. When we come back, I want to dive into what Rob was talking about with this accountability piece, because we need someone with your experience level to help us understand how that needs to work, because as Rob pointed out, we're in a critical moment here where we're trying to regain trust in our entire institution, and it's very difficult to do. So we've got to keep cooler heads and move forward, but in the right way. We'll be right back with retired Captain Dan McCarthy and Commander Rob Green.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Is the government tracking you? Do they have access to all your data? Well, if you go to worldviewtalk.com, you'll find out about a cell phone company that, well, does not store your data. They don't do that. This is what they're known for. They don't store your data. You have privacy. You're not being tracked. That's why a lot of folks are turning to worldviewtalk.com. You'll find their prices are very competitive. All the details are there at worldviewtalk.com. Again, worldviewtalk.com. Oh, while you're there, not only do they have cell phones that aren't tracking you, you can find out about how to get a satellite phone. Should the whole system go down and you want to communicate with a family member or a loved one, you might want to have a satellite phone. Or how about their solar generators? They have great solar generators. Check them all out right now. Worldviewtalk.com, worldviewtalk.com.
This past Friday, the Secretary of Defense announced that he's replacing the judge.
Experts say that Russian hackers found a way to hack our utilities.
This past Friday, the Secretary of Defense announced that he's replacing the Judge Advocates General of all the military services. The media and pundits are predicting a crisis, but noticeably with zero specifics. Former Secretary of the Air Force Frank Kendall said that this truly frightens him, because these are the people that interpret the Uniform Code of Military Justice and the people who have independent legal authority to tell any military commander that an order from the President or the Secretary of Defense is unlawful and cannot be obeyed. While this is an accurate description of the job function, Kendall offers zero argument as to whether the officials being replaced were faithfully executing that function. I can't speak for the Army or the Air Force, but I have definite personal opinions about the Navy. Of the last 4 Judge Advocates General of the Navy, 1 was found to have committed unlawful command influence by interfering in a court-martial for political purposes to keep an innocent man in jail. 1 received a report of felony criminal conduct by another JAG admiral, and not only buried it, but actually named that admiral as his own successor. And the most recent Judge Advocate General, who rushed a retirement package 2.5 months into the job, probably to avoid being prosecuted himself for misconduct. A retired military judge told CNN that the move to replace JAGs is extremely concerning because they serve as the conscience of the military and the moral guide for what's right or wrong. Nobody's offering a specific defense as to why the outgoing JAGs served as an effective conscience or moral guide, because they can't. The status quo in the military justice system has failed our warriors. I have full faith in Secretary Hegseth that he will ensure that smart and ethical leaders are appointed to fill these roles and to serve as the conscious and moral guide that our military needs.
Welcome back to the Rob Maynard Show. It's Whistleblower Wednesday, and we're talking with some great expert guests on the firing of the senior Judge Advocate General officers from each service, and that was Tim Parlator commenting on what some of the comments from the establishment have been. And my guest today is Navy Commander Rob Green, an author, an active duty Navy officer, and he wrote the book Defending a Constitution Behind Enemy Lines about the issues associated with the illegal actions during the COVID crisis and how folks worked behind the scenes and behind those enemy lines to try to protect the Constitution. And my other guest is retired U.S. Navy Captain JAG, Dan McCarthy. And Dan, the big question is accountability. Tim mentioned Frank Kendall there, the former Secretary of the Air Force. And one of the illegal things that he did was, and we have this in a sworn deposition that was in a courtroom in a trial, one of the trials, that he called all of his generals into a room at the regular general meeting called Corona in the Air Force and said there will be no religious exemptions in direct violation of the RFRA Act that was passed after the anthrax vaccine debacle. And accountability has to happen to reestablish the trust that Rob was talking about before we went to the break. What should we be looking for to achieve real accountability?
Well, Colonel, those are really good questions. And I would be happy to just kind of walk you through what the options are and what the various issues that surround the options. If I could backtrack first, just to make sure everybody understands, one thing I neglected to mention in my first kind of commentaries was you need to understand that 3- and 4-star admirals and generals are in what they call positions of special trust and responsibility. And they get appointed by the civilian leadership. So, unfortunately, the military system almost creates those that are aspiring to a 3rd and 4th star can have a tendency to want to give the political leaders what they want, so they'll get appointed to those 3- and 4-star positions. So when it became clear that some of the civilian leadership wanted to press the vaccine, for instance, and we could talk about some of the other areas, not just the vaccine, but in essence, you have some motivation for 3- and 4-star admirals and generals to go along with the program. That filters down to the JAGs, too. If you want to be liked by the 3- and 4-star all the time, the best thing is to tell him, sure, you can do that, because he wants to do it to satisfy his civilian leaders. Lost in all this is the sailor, is commanders like Rob that are down there trying to do the right job, but also have their own view of what's morally courageous and ways that we should be serving based on the training that Rob got throughout his career and at the Naval Academy, and the belief that we're a constitutional Navy that works hard to follow the law. So with that as a background, we now have the problem that some of our leaders ignored the law and some of our judge advocates lacked the courage to reveal the law. So what do you do? And that's now the sort of accountability question. The first sort of, I guess, decision you have to make is, do you even want to go back and mess with it? Could you just say that was yesterday, there's new leadership, let's move forward and deal with the problems in front of us, not the ones behind us? But I don't think that's a good idea for the very reason, Colonel, that you said. People have to trust and have confidence that their leaders are going to do things right and that their lawyers are going to provide accurate legal information and legal advice. And when they don't, military people know that military is full of an accountability system that demands excellence and skilled performance. We don't hesitate to fire a commanding officer of a ship if he runs aground, or an aviator if he makes a mistake while flying, or a nuclear submariner if he makes a bad decision or poor judgment. So why then should we just give a free pass to the leaders and the lawyers that obviously did not demonstrate the courage and the conviction and the leadership that we would hope for? So if you pass question 1, yes, let's have some accountability. I've read many articles by people that are upset about what's gone on, and one of the first things they'll say is, well, let's recall them to active duty and court-martial them for failures of leadership. You could try to do that in some cases. It is true that retirees remain subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and they can be recalled to be held accountable for mistakes they made on active duty, which surface after they're retired. So if the group that wants to recall and then charge and take these to court, there's just so many obstacles with doing that it's just not realistic. For instance, if you were trying to bring back either, let's say, General Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, first off, the military uniform code for military process and courts martials are just not designed for trying senior leaders. Members that sit, let's say jurists, if you will, that sit are supposed to be senior to the individual charged. How are you going to bring in a panel that's senior to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, for instance? Also, who's going to charge the chairman of the Joint Chiefs? The Secretary of Defense personally, or are you going to lower it to a 1 or 2 star to bring charges against a 3 or 4 star admiral or general? It just gets very, very complicated. Who sits as the military judge? Who prosecutes the 4 star? What kind of witnesses are you going to have? Is the president going to be called as a witness to say, well, here's what I told the chairman that I wanted done? Or are you going to have to call a lot of other 3 and 4 stars to say this is what went on when we were formulating the policies and the judgment, etc.? So I would recommend against the recall and court-martial option. I just don't think the Uniform Code of Military Justice is designed or equipped to handle those fairly. So if you take the sort of court-martial off the table, then what's left? And I will tell you what usually happens in these cases and what I would suggest is the best option. Under 10 U.S. Code 1370, you can conduct what they call a grade officer determination. And these are administrative reviews done by leaders, a civilian leader or a military leader, that could look at the underlying conduct of the military officer that's in question and make a decision about what is the last pay grade they serve satisfactorily in. We get retired in the last pay grade we serve satisfactorily in. So the question would be, could you put together a panel, let's say, that looked at the actions of the senior military officers and the senior judge advocates, and maybe some others, maybe some senior doctors that didn't provide good advice about the vaccine, for instance, or others, and make a decision when did they last and what pay grade did they last serve in satisfactorily. That is a purely administrative review. It's up to the Secretary of Defense or the service secretaries. And if there's certain rules, if it's a 3 or a 4 star, it has to be done by the Secretary of Defense, and the President and the Senate have to be informed if they're reviewed. If they're reduced a pay grade to 3 star, it would have to go to the President for approval. If they were reduced below that to 2 star or less, it can be done by the service secretary if delegated from the Secretary of Defense. So the bottom line is the UCMJ and federal law provide for a mechanism to review the conduct of senior officers and lawyers and other military officers to determine what pay grade they deserve to be retired in. And I would be a proponent of, if you agree that there should be some accountability, that the right accountability is an administrative review conducted to determine what's the last pay grade that these officers served in satisfactorily, and then make a judgment on that and demote the officers that didn't live up to their responsibilities. It's not unheard of. In 2017, there was an Air Force 2-star that was, or 4-star, excuse me, that was retired as a 2-star. I can think back to my days in the Secretariat. There were times when we sent flag officers home with a demoted pay rank. And they would, of course, would then not receive the benefits of the title of whatever position that they were kind of removed from. They would also lose some of their retirement pay for their misconduct, for their failure to sort of have the moral courage that Rob talked about to do the right thing.
Wow. It's a great answer. We got to take our last break. When we come back, I want to continue this, Dan, and bring Rob in here and talk about some of the follow-on law breaking that we're hearing about. I know he's reported on it and actually submitted whistleblower information to the NCIS and the JAG Corps in the Navy. And I want to get your take on how do you hold the lower echelons of command and supervision accountable, especially the ones that may still be on active duty beyond just the 3 and 4 stars. We'll be right back with the Rob Maness Show here on Whistleblower Wednesday.